Hi everyone, it's Rowan J. Coleman, the guy you've probably been listening to for the last 18 videos about Star Trek. And first off, I wanted to say a big thank you to everyone who watched this video series, shared this video series, and just generally enjoyed it. This has been a real labour of love, and it's been a bigger success than I ever could have imagined. It's really thanks to this series I've been able to make this my full-time job, so once again, big thank you for that. And seeing as how my next retrospective series on Babylon 5 begins next week, I thought I'd do a quick epilogue to my Star Trek series, addressing some of the myths which often get repeated in the fandom, pointing out some of the mistakes I made in the series, and also answering your questions. So first up, the myths. Every now and then I'd see someone do an actually on me, and quite a few of these have been long-standing myths within the fanbase, but according to my own research, didn't turn out to be true. The first of these was the letter-writing campaign to save Star Trek the original series. Now, quite a few folk in the comments told me I got this wrong, and that the letter-writing campaign occurred either after Season 2 or 3 and not Season 1. I feel like this is some kind of Mandela effect thing, as this is also what I thought when I was making the video, but every source I read and every interview I watched said the campaign started after Season 1. I think the confusion comes from the fan mail the show received throughout its run. Fans wrote in a lot during Seasons 2 and 3, but the coordinated effort by Roddenberry and the various fan groups to stop the series getting cancelled occurred after Season 1. The renewal for Season 3 was actually announced on air during a Season 2 episode, so there was never much doubt about Star Trek getting a third season. The second myth, although using this word is a bit of a stretch, surrounds Majel Barrett and the character Number 1. As we know, in The Cage there was Number 1 as the first officer, but in the series proper, that character was gone and Spock was the first officer. Now, I don't think I really settled on a definitive version of events here, but rather gave both sides of the story. Gene Roddenberry and others have insisted this studio note was sexist, that NBC couldn't stomach a woman being first officer. However, others have insisted the network was merely concerned about nepotism, because Roddenberry and Barrett were having an affair at the time. And I saw one comment say I shouldn't have included the former account because there was definitive proof in the form of a studio memo which said the reason for the change was due to nepotism. And this is where I have to kind of do my own interpretation of events. Though again, I don't think I said either version was definitively true in the video. But some would say this studio memo should settle which account is true and which one is false. However, if you know anything about the way Hollywood works, nepotism is rife within the industry. I find it strange that anyone at NBC would have this staunch anti-nepotism stance, and I couldn't find anything to support the idea that Roddenberry had given Barrett any kind of preferential treatment. It's not like she was being paid an absurdly high salary or anything. People cast their friends, family, and other loved ones in projects all the time, and in fact, in terms of preferential treatment, it was actually Nichelle Nichols who was given a surprisingly high salary on the show in proportion to how big her role was. And Roddenberry did have an affair with Nichols as well before she joined the series, yet there was never a memo from NBC saying Uhura should be removed from the series. So I think even with the existence of this memo, the logic doesn't really track. In my personal opinion, I do think sexism did play a part, but again, in the video I didn't definitively say which version of events was true. To go way later, the next myth of sorts I want to address concerns Nicholas Locarno and Tom Paris from TNG and Voyager respectively. It's been suggested that the real reason Locarno wasn't the character in Voyager was because Berman or the studio or whoever didn't want to pay royalties to Ronald D. Moore and Naren Shankar, who wrote the episode The First Duty which introduced Locarno. However, the line Berman always gave was that Locarno was irredeemable, that initially they were going to bring the character back but decided Locarno was too much of a bad guy. Some fans react to this saying it's total bullshit, that clearly Berman and Paramount were just cheapskates and that rather than paying the writers their due they simply created Tom Paris instead. The thing is, I'm not sure I personally agree with that. I totally understand why this gets repeated a lot. It does seem very in character for Rick Berman, unfortunately, but I do also think there is a logic to saying Locarno was irredeemable. Just as Robert Duncan McNeill said, Tom Paris is ultimately a good guy who made some mistakes, whereas Locarno wasn't a good guy deep down. And if you go back and watch The First Duty, Locarno is really a nasty piece of work actually. He's extremely emotionally manipulative and selfish, which Tom Paris definitely isn't. As I said, I definitely see where this royalties argument comes from, and it does make sense, but in my opinion, I don't actually think it's as cut and dry as a lot of people make it out to be. So, with the myths out of the way, let's get into some actual mistakes I made. The first one is from the motion picture retrospective where I said this. Producer Harold Livingston, who would later go on to work on several Star Trek TV shows, was brought on to assemble the show's writer's room. Yeah, I was thinking of David Livingston. Harold Livingston didn't work on any more Star Trek. For some reason, I just saw the surname and assumed this is where David Livingston got his start. But David Livingston worked as a line producer on TNG, then eventually a co-producer and later a director on DS9 and Voyager, and I think Enterprise as well. Another mistake I made was in the Voyage Home retrospective where I said this. For the film's score, composer James Horner wasn't available to return, so Nimoy hired Lennon Rosenman, who had composed the score for Nicholas Meyer's first film Time After Time. That's incorrect. Leonard Rosenman didn't score Time After Time. That was Miklos Rosa. No idea where I got this from, but that's just incorrect. Thirdly, and this one really annoys me because it's so small, but in my DS9 retrospective I kept saying means justify the ends. He is determined to put a stop to criminality and uncover the truth, but in doing so his methods often violate personal privacy, and he seems to condone a means justify the ends attitude. It's ends justify the means justify the ends doesn't make any sense. I think this was just a total brain fart or something. I just mixed up the words for some reason, so oops. And finally from Voyager, it's the whole Garrett Wang was almost fired, but Rick Berman changed his mind because Garrett Wang was in People magazine's 50 Most Beautiful People. As I've been told in the comments to this video, this is apparently not true according to Garrett Wang himself, who has debunked this story on the podcast The Delta Flyers. This is a little annoying because the original story actually came from Garrett Wang as well. From the official Star Trek Voyager magazine. However, if you read his quote, it is mostly made up of maybes and possibilities as opposed to concrete, this is what happened. I don't know, it seems like this story was maybe exaggerated or the rumour got out of control, but it seems like it wasn't actually true. On a side note, however, no, I am not pronouncing Garrett Wang's name wrong. In Mandarin, even though the anglicised spelling has an A, the surname is not Wang, it's Wong. I got so many comments about this and they're all wrong. With the myths and mistakes out of the way though, on to your questions. Ultimate Knight asks, will you do a retrospective on Discovery, Picard and Lower Decks when they end? Unfortunately, I have to be super vague about this and only say maybe. I've said this in a few places before, but I don't plan on being a YouTuber forever. As much as I enjoy it and as grateful as I am that this is my job, it's not really what I want to do as my main career ultimately. What I really want to do is filmmaking, and right now I'm developing a few pretty exciting projects which I hope will take off in some way and open up some further opportunities. So by the time all the current Star Trek shows have wrapped up, I honestly don't know if I'll still be doing YouTube full time. I'll never shut the channel down, but the idea is to open it up to other content creators. I'll still contribute content to it, but it's not my goal to keep doing this forever. So will I make retrospectives of the modern Star Trek shows when they end? I don't know, maybe. David Willocks asks, who do you think is the best Star Trek music composer? This is an incredibly tough question to answer. As for the TV composers, it's a bit easier. I think Dennis McCarthy was hands down the best, although Ron Jones did some really great stuff for TNG as well. Honestly, I've never really liked Jay Chataway's stuff very much. I find a lot of that is quite bland, but Dennis McCarthy made the excellent DS9 theme, and his stuff for All Good Things is terrific. It's no wonder he was chosen to score Generations, which is one of my favourite Star Trek scores. As for the movies though, I'd probably have to say Jerry Goldsmith. Whenever I think of Star Trek music, his theme from the motion picture is instantly what springs to mind as the Star Trek theme. But obviously James Horner and Michael Giacchino did incredible work as well, and Leonard Rosenman and Cliff Idleman, even though they were like one and done, I still really like their scores as well. So yeah, there's plenty of great music. I don't think there's a single weak composer really in all of Star Trek, but I'd have to say Jerry Goldsmith and his theme is at the top for me. Jack McGinn asks, have you considered updating your best and worst episodes lists for the shows? Yes, those videos are on the list. For those who may not know, I made some top 10 best and top 10 worst episodes years and years ago, and just like my original reviews, they're not really up to my standards anymore. So yes, at some point I will be making new best episode lists for all the shows I covered in this retrospective series. Kevin Ames asks, could you provide more insight into what happened to the actress who played Kes? This is something which I chose not to really address in my retrospective video because there isn't really a lot of concrete info about it. It's only much more recently that the cast and crew of Voyager have briefly talked about Jennifer Lien's departure from the series in more detail. It seems she had some mental health issues which were affecting her time on the series, and this may have contributed to her being written out. However, because of the lack of detail, I didn't really want to talk about this and risk being insensitive or handling the subject without the proper tactfulness. I fully expect the upcoming documentary about Voyager to finally go into this in more detail, but presently there isn't a lot of solid information about this, so I just decided to skip over discussing this in the original video. Duck Reviews asks, what was your favourite video in the series to make? It's a bit random, but probably part 9 on Star Trek Generations. I really enjoyed making that one because there was so much behind the scenes video footage available. A lot of the time I had to construct visuals out of still images and quotes and so on, but the Blu-ray for Generations has some brilliant behind the scenes material, and so that was really just a joy to edit. Jack Dubs asks, is there anything in your retrospectives you're most proud of and or would want to go back and change? I'd want to go back and change a few things with part 1, the original series review. I wish I had covered a few more episodes, and also just technically I think the editing could have been a bit better. That video was really the trial run for this whole series, and it took time to really refine my workflow for these videos, and knowing what I know now, I definitely go back and change a few things in part 1 just to bring it up to the standard of the other videos. In terms of what I'm most proud of though, I'm extremely happy with how a lot of the clips came out in the DS9 video. You may not have even noticed, but I had to make these very small edits to the clips to avoid getting copyright claims or strikes, and my worry was that these small edits would dilute the quality of the scenes I was showing, somehow lose their emotional impact. But I was really happy with how they turned out, and I think they were still very effective. John Davis and Genesism asks, which film/series did you change your opinion on the most after the retrospective? Probably Nemesis and Enterprise. I don't think I necessarily enjoyed them more than I did before, but I feel like I understood them better. I got what they were going for, which allowed me to better recognize their strengths a bit more. In fact, I actually did enjoy Enterprise Seasons 1 and 2 a lot more than I expected. I still think Season 3 and 4 are much better, but I found more to like in Seasons 1 and 2 than I expected. Ego Guy asks, which individual season of Star Trek do you think is the best overall? Speak of the devil, it genuinely might be Star Trek Enterprise Season 3. I know not everyone agrees, but I truly think the Xindi arc is just brilliant. As many commenters have said, the Xindi arc felt like it was what Voyager's Year of Hell was supposed to be. Just how desperate and dire the situation becomes after Azati Prime. It's just full of so much brilliant character work and really interesting ideas. I think it's just brilliant. I also think Season 4 of Deep Space Nine is way up there. There's only like one episode in that whole season I don't really like, but it's got Way of the Warrior and Homefront Paradise Lost. That's really where DS9 hit its stride, and it's so consistently strong from episode to episode. Dave Joyce and Alan Collinson ask, how long does it take you to make a retrospective video? So it varies between the movie retrospectives and the show retrospectives. Because I was always refining my workflow, I think I was able to get the movies down to about 3 to 4 days by the end, though initially it took me over a week. For the TV shows, I think the TNG and DS9 retrospectives took me about a whole month each to complete. Those were definitely the longest. Voyager and Enterprise were about 3 weeks each. And that's just regular 9 to 5 days of me researching, writing, and editing and so on. The Babylon 5 retrospective I'm working on right now will also be about 3 weeks in total, for part 1 at least. Drunken Warlock asks, will you do a retrospective on the animated series? Quite a few people were either annoyed or confused as to why I didn't do a retrospective on the animated series. There are two primary reasons. Firstly, this retrospective series was largely meant to improve on my old reviews, but I did do a review of the animated series not too long ago, and I'm still pretty happy with it overall. I didn't feel a need to redo it. Secondly, and this is where some of you might get a bit pissed off, I honestly didn't think the animated series warranted the same treatment. I know it's really important for certain fans, but in the grand scheme of things, in terms of the history of the Star Trek franchise, I see the animated series as really just a footnote. I don't think it's very important, and I honestly just don't really like it all that much. I think it's good, but I don't see myself ever rewatching it again, so I simply decided to give it a mention in part 2, but I chose to move on to what I saw as more significant chapters in the franchise's history. If you think that's totally wrong and unreasonable and I should have covered it despite my opinion, that's fair enough, but as I said, I did already make a decent video on it a while ago, so if you really want to know my thoughts, they're on the channel. Fox Mulder asks, will you do a retrospective on the X-Files? I actually decided to randomly rewatch some X-Files recently, so maybe, I don't know yet, but I have thought about it. Best of DBZ1 asks, what are some things you had to cut out of videos which you wish you could have kept? So as I said earlier, I wish I had covered more episodes of the original series in more detail, episodes like Mirror Mirror or the Tholian Web. There were also a few in the Next Generation I had to cut just for time and pacing and so on, but I certainly wish I had covered more stuff in the original series. Travis M. Baker and Tom Costello ask, what did you use to research the series? So my primary research source was The 50-Year Mission by Edward Gross and Mark A. Altman. Those are terrific books, I would highly recommend those. I also read Inside Star Trek, The Real Story by Herbert F. Solow and Robert Justman. A lot of other things I just got from Memory Alpha, or even just the bonus features on the various Blu-rays and DVDs, so a wide range of sources. Gregory Breen asks, which video's research unearthed the most interesting trivia which you didn't already know? Definitely Enterprise. I knew very little about the making of Enterprise or the circumstances of its cancellation, so that was very cool to research. I had no idea Berman and Braga had envisioned an entire first season set on Earth, which sounds fascinating. I had no idea about the ridiculous studio notes, like having a band play in the mess hall. Actually, there was even one studio note I left out, where apparently some executive wanted the NX-01 Enterprise to just be the Akira class. They were like, they saw a picture of the Akira class, I assume, at some point, and they were like, that's a cool ship, just use that design. And the creative team had to explain why that wouldn't make any sense whatsoever. So Enterprise was full of really interesting stories I hadn't heard before. I had a really good time learning new things all about that show. Captain Bailey Fong asks, what inspired you to make this retrospective series in the first place? As I mentioned earlier, I was no longer happy with my original set of reviews. At the time, YouTube film criticism was very much of the nostalgia critic variety, very snarky and nitpicky and sort of self-important. So not only does the editing not hold up, but I think I'm just better at articulating my opinions and analysing art and media in general. So it just made sense to do much better versions of those original videos. I was also heavily inspired by several YouTube channels which just made incredible stuff. Oliver Harper's retrospective reviews are fantastic. I've been watching those for ages. I was also completely blown away by Indigo Gaming's documentaries on Cyberpunk. I love those videos. But most of all, the chief inspiration was Clever Dick Films' retrospectives on Doctor Who. I had never really had much of an interest in classic Doctor Who, but I stumbled across those videos and they were so well produced and thoroughly researched, I just wanted to make something on the same level. What I hope is the same level anyway. If you've asked if I'm going to make a retrospective series on Doctor Who, I basically don't need to, because this guy already did the best job anyone can do as far as I'm concerned. But really, I wanted to make the series because I love Star Trek, and I couldn't think of a better way to express my passion for the franchise than in a series like this one. And once again, I'm exceedingly thankful that the thing I care about making the most on this channel is also the most successful thing on this channel. I know that's not always true on YouTube, but I'm certainly glad it is for me. But now we've reached the end of this Star Trek extravaganza. I certainly hope you've enjoyed watching it as much as I have enjoyed making it. My next two-part retrospective on Babylon 5 is due to start next week, so just as a parting gift, here's a wee preview of that. In the late 1980s, the pop culture landscape was changed forever following the debut of Star Trek: The Next Generation. By its third season, the show had proven its detractors wrong by becoming a new definitive incarnation of the Star Trek franchise, which had previously been defined by the iconic trio of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. The success of The Next Generation proved Star Trek could move beyond its foundations, and paved the way for future spin-offs Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, and the full slate of modern shows we enjoy today. In the early 90s, science fiction television was dominated by this single brand. The adventures of the crew of the USS Enterprise going boldly where no one has gone before, exploring strange new worlds and encountering strange new life, was what defined the genre on the small screen for many people, and there was seemingly no room for anything else. That is, until an unlikely but ambitious challenger stepped up to prove this assumption wrong. The year was 1993, and the name of the show was Babylon 5. Thank you for watching. If you like these videos, subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay up to date on my new uploads. If you want to help the channel grow, join my patrons or my YouTube members, where you can see videos early as well as some other exclusive content. Speaking of which, I'd like to quickly thank all of my patrons and members who are now appearing on screen. Have a good one, and as always, live long and prosper.